Hello and welcome to the NextPowerUp review summary of Thea the Awakening. This is developed and published by Muha Games, and this is a nice little mixture of a 4X turn-based strategy game and a little bit of roguelike element in there too. Now, you've probably seen our impressions video last week that we published on Saturday, I think. And the review is obviously up right now, so you can check out the little section below for the full written review and, of course, the performance analysis. But in this review summary, I just want to cover the main highlights, the things that impress us and things that didn't impress us that I've also highlighted in the main review. And what's happened with the video I've recorded is that the roguelike aspect of this game takes quite a large effect if you're quite a gun-ho style player. And so what tends to happen with me is I'll either focus on warriors when I first start the game, and you can see at the start of this video you get to choose a god, and whether you have gatherers, crafters, or soldiers as your primary warriors, as your primary set of villagers. And so what tends to happen is I either go full on macro and just build up loads of stuff, research loads of stuff, and try and just get as much base building and setup done as possible, and then I'll go out and start clobbering monsters and stuff like that. But what tends to happen is I always seem to get too big for my boots. I'll overstretch by quite a substantial amount because I'm thinking, oh, I can take on anything. I got really powerful weapons, no problem. And then I will suddenly come across a random enemy and get absolutely crushed. So first, I'll cover the negatives because there's a couple. And I can see these are being, primary things that are going to dictate whether you're going to play this game or not, or whether you'll buy it or not, for that matter. And the first few things I want to cover is all random events, all tests of stats or fighting or sneaking or hunting or using intellect or using social options in order to resolve any certain situation that is built out from these random events or through trying to do a quest. They're all resolved through this card game that they say is similar to Gwent. Now, for the first hour of the game, the tutorial describes a lot of things in lots of written detail, but it never really goes through an awful lot of the game as you're going through it. It doesn't say things and say, hey, do this, and it doesn't go, oh, you can now do this, and now press this button. It does that for the first 5 minutes perhaps, but then after that it just sort of says, here's a load of text, scroll through it and now try and do it yourself. And that's what happens when you come across the card part of the game, and that's really annoying because it asks you to scroll through 23 little snippets of text and then goes, hey, have some fun, go ahead and solve this card game. Now, the first card game it gets you to do is a simple combat or hunt event, and it's quite easy. You are significantly more powerful than the cards that are against you. And so even though you don't fully understand it, or at least I didn't fully understand it, the card game made no sense to me whatsoever to begin with, you can still succeed. And that's pretty bad because it makes you think, oh, this isn't that complicated. I'll just go ahead and do the card game from now on and I'll be fine. Except what you'll find is if you don't understand the card game, you're going to get absolutely crushed. Certainly from the early to mid game. And in the late game, you're screwed if you don't understand how the card game works. And so the tutorial is a bit lacking when it comes to explaining a lot of things. And it's not just the card game. It's also the fact that all of your villagers have an awful lot of stats. They don't just have health, defense, armor, intellect, wisdom, or your generic stuff. They have a lot of stats, and we're talking like 2 or 3 dozen different types of stats, ranging from sneak, social, hunting, intelligence, speech, tactics, poison, shielding, obviously, and on top of armor, will. There's a lot of stats, and none of them really are actually specifically covered in anything. It's just a lot of common sense. And what you'll find is these stats will provide different speech or dialogue options in order for you to resolve events into various different ways. And the higher these stats are on your villagers, the more likely you are to succeed when you're trying to resolve something, say, through social means. So let's imagine you've got 4 people in an expedition and you're charging out, and you can resolve a situation by social because one of your guys has a social stat. The catch is that social stat is only 1, and so you might choose to resolve the event using social means and then fail horribly, whereas you had a relatively decent army with armor and weapons or whatever that you probably could have resolved. But both of them show the same difficulty. The difficulty levels aren't based on what you currently have equipped or what the stats are of your current expedition. So if you've got an army that's absolutely badass and has like this awesome armor that gives 20 armor and 5 shielding and a load of battle axes that have 20 damage, the fighting event will have, say, 3 skulls, and you'll probably quite easily defeat a 3 skull fighting event with that sort of gear. But then the sneak event will also have 3 skulls, and you might have one character that's only got 1 sneak stat. And so this whole difficulty level, it explains how difficult it is in comparison to not a lot. It doesn't base the difficulty on what you currently have facing this event. And so that's a little bit annoying because you have all these stats that you have to keep in mind of, and you have to learn how much of a stat is technically good, how much of a stat you need to fight a 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 schooled threat. And so yeah, the number of stats is very overwhelming, and the things that dictate how useful these stats are is even more overwhelming and can quite greatly affect how you play the game and whether you succeed at the game or whether you get annoyed because you're constantly losing. And so that's a little bit of an annoyance. But, you know, this is the kind of game that you need to spend a lot of hours in. And that's another thing I want to note, is that a single game in Thea can take 6 hours. And this is a roguelike game with some persistence. So the idea is for you to play a number of games, earn XP for your god so you can unlock extra tiers of passive bonuses that your god can provide to your villagers. And so you've got to spend 6 hours doing a 600 or 700 turn match, die and just kill yourself or whatever, and then start again. And so this game is really only for those people that are interested in spending long periods on 4X games. Now, most people who enjoy 4X games are going to do that anyway. I myself used to spend weeks on Master of Orion and days on games of the original Civilization games, and very long periods of time on Endless Legend. So if you're looking at playing a 4X game, you have to have it in your head that I am going to have to spend up to 4 to 6 hours if I want to do extremely well in a match. So not everyone has that amount of time to dedicate to a game, and so this game is not really for those who are looking for a little bit of casual play, because you're not necessarily going to get that persistence through the roguelike element of it. So apart from those few things, it's pretty much... that's all there is bad. I mean, the card game that I've mentioned earlier can get very repetitive. As I said, everything is resolved via this card game. It's not just fighting. Every single quest that bases any solution on a stat is dealt with this card game. And so if you don't get on with the card game, which I didn't, then you're probably not going to enjoy doing it, and you're going to spend your entire time pressing the auto-resolve button. But that's okay, because in this game there is a configurable difficulties options menu, and so you can make the game as hard or as easy as you like, and there are a few options which allow you to either avoid doing too much of this card game or just make that bit a little bit easier. So if you wanted to just use the auto-resolve, you could, but you could make other aspects of the game more difficult and still receive an XP bonus and not get too negated. So it does allow you to cater towards people with certain playstyles who don't like certain aspects of the game but do like others. So you can make the other bits you do like hard, but stuff like the card game, in my case, I couldn't stand it. I auto-resolved the whole way through the game, and I would just play it for when I was doing previews and things like that. So it's the card game is very bland, repetitive, quite complicated for new players, and not everyone's going to get on with it. However, with this really quite detailed options menu you have, it's pretty good if you don't like certain aspects, that you can just sort of phase them out. And so on to the good things, and the first thing I want to mention is that the map is enormous. So this is a roguelike game, and I would say the map is about as enormous as... if you've played Civ Beyond Earth, you've got sort of a narrow but wide rectangular shaped map, and this is more squarish, but it's about that size. And you can change the size of the map. You could make it as small or as large as you like, depending on how far afield you want to collect resources. And so the map can be absolutely massive, and you can end up sending multiple expeditions all over the place, which is quite cool. It's nice to have a lot of free roam. I know a lot of turn-based strategy games sometimes suffer from quite a condensed small area of map, and that can get a little bit annoying. Aside from that is the sheer content. I know people that literally within a couple of days, well, about a week of release, they had already spent well over 100 hours playing the game. And that's simply because there's so much content in the game. We're not just talking quests, we're talking materials, researches, different randomized events, the maps are randomly generated, so everything's different. The size of the map, the number of random quests and events and main quests, and the complications of doing those, the amount of time you have to spend on building up your village and crafting new buildings for your village, the amount of craftable items, the amount of craftable weapons. It's just, there is a lot of content in this game, and there is just stupendous amounts of hours worth of content. I mean, I've only spent like 20 or so hours playing this game, but there is at least 100 hours worth of gameplay here, if not more, depending on whether you want to unlock all of the gods or not. So that's pretty cool. Another thing is, as I mentioned with the difficulty level, this game does support a lot of different styles of play. Obviously, the default sort of thing is just get yourself a few gatherers, a few crafters, and then send out an army and just take over the map. But if you can configure this difficulty level to phase out the certain aspects that you don't necessarily like, and you can sit back and just build your village and collect stuff and gain XP and research by simply crafting things or building unique things with unique, well, not unique, but the slightly rarer resources, and that is a viable option. Obviously, it's not quite as quick as gaining XP through killing random floating around hostile mobs. But the other interesting thing is a lot of these side quests and a lot of the random events can be solved through other means other than just hunting, sneaking, or fighting. A lot of these things can be solved with social, so you could just be a totally passive village and you could spec all of your guys into social stuff and then make sure you choose the social options every time you go into an event, and then that will level up when your characters level up. And so you could essentially go through the entire game not killing anything, but sort of talking everyone into various different things and doing these social challenges. And the other thing that's quite cool is these random events don't always play out how you think. A lot of them are the same random event, but they can have different outcomes. Like I remember one random event that comes to mind is this thing would be trying to eat all your food, and the first thing I did was I had a character with high wisdom, and so they knew about this demon and said, oh, it's going to eat all our stuff, so I killed it, and it put a curse on me, but I got a load of free resources. And then the second or third time around I played, the same thing happened. I thought, oh, I know what I'll do, I'll try something else, and I had this other blue option which comes up if you've got like a certain high stat on one of your characters. And it was like, oh, give it food. And so I gave it food, and then it gave me a blessing and gave me loads more resources. And another thing happened where you get set upon by an orc war party. And what happens is you can either fight them, and it's quite difficult. Orcs are pretty tough to kill. And if you kill them, then you'll get all of their loot and XP and research, and plain and simple. Or if you have a female warrior in your party, you can talk them out of killing you or fighting, and they'll ask you to help them. And so you can agree to help them or fight them. But if you agree to help them, they'll then fall down a crevice. And what you can either do, or they'll come up against an enemy. And what you can either do is you can help them. And then they'll say, oh, thank you for blah, 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 blah. Here, have such and such as a token of our gratitude. But what happens is if you help them and fail, you still don't get annihilated by the orcs. Yes, you might get dealt some damage, or you might even lose a character, one of your villagers, but the orcs will say, oh, that was such an honourable thing to do. Here, have an orc villager to take back to your village. And so there's a lot of random events in this game that aren't they look bad, or they might look good, but they can actually turn out quite bad or quite good. And that's one thing I really like, is just the randomization of this game, and every single playthrough feels very, very much different. Obviously there's the persistence between games. If you continue to do a load of quests, if you get loads of rare recipes that have been researched, if you clear loads and loads of stuff, that'll all build up into XP, and there's a few different things at the end of the match that can earn you XP. And when you get this XP, you get that XP on the god that you've chosen in the first place, and that will then increase their level, and they can get from level 1 to 5, and those levels will unlock additional passive bonuses that you can start a new game with. And of course, every single time you level up, you unlock a new god. And so there's about 8 gods, I think, to unlock. One of the gods can only be unlocked by a quest line, and one of the gods can only be unlocked by unlocking all the rest. But once you hit level 2, 3, 4, and 5, you'll then unlock a few more. So it's nice to know that even when you've lost a match or won a match, you'll still get some bonuses that will apply to your next game. Obviously, the immensely detailed difficulty options are a great thing. And the other thing I've noticed is that I've become very personable with a lot of my villagers in the same way that you become personable with your soldiers in XCOM. It follows that sort of style of villager management where you will know the name of a villager. They will join you from perhaps a child. You get to choose whether they're a gatherer or a crafter or a soldier, and then you can outfit them yourself. And then you might spend a long time building them very specifically and making them do certain things. So certain stats that they use a lot will get leveled up the next time your whole village levels up or the expedition. And so you spend a lot of time, getting to know this certain villager and building them to just the way you like it. And when they get injured or when they get a serious wound, which can cause them to die or sometimes survive, you actually you think, oh crap, if I lose them. And there was a stage when I first started playing this game when I had a war party and I sent them out, and there was one specific character that was totally badass, and they got seriously wounded and died. And at that point, I just thought, oh screw it, if that person's died, there's no hope. That's it. I'm just going to start again. Took all my villagers out of the village, sent them off to attack something that they were definitely going to lose against, and just killed them all and started all over again because I lost that soldier. And that was pretty cool. And it does a very good job, I think, of making you get very attached to your villagers, which is quite good. And the other thing is the resource management. Obviously, the way it works is you have a certain few resources that you have unlocked as standard, and they're all like a basic tier 1 level of resource. And then when you reach a certain point on your research little meter dial thing, you can then research either a construction, some crafting, or you can research materials. And what happens is if you research materials, you get some of that material, then all of the gathering locations show up on the map. And so what you kind of have to balance between is what materials you're going to research so you can collect them, what you're then going to use those materials to craft or build, and then whether you want to research a material before you can gather it, or whether you want to research a craftable item because you already have some of it from a quest. And so it's quite a nice little resource management system. And in order to collect resources, obviously you can't build villages or anything. You're stuck in one area, and your first village will only ever start with 1 or 2 resources. And so you'll start off only being able to collect food and wood. And in order to build shiny weapons and build nice buildings that will attract orcs and elves and all those sorts of things, you need rare materials. And what you have to do is you have to build an expedition with not just soldiers to protect this expedition, but also gatherers, so you can make a tent, gather loads of materials, and then send it back to your village. And so it's quite a nice risk reward system, and it works out very well because you do sometimes fuck up pretty bad and get your ass handed to you and then lose, and then you feel a bit distraught because you've done all this. But then if you do succeed, you can then take it back to your village, craft yourself some more awesome stuff, and then continue with perhaps some of the harder main quests. And so the whole game is just this massive mishmash of all of these extremely well-developed things all together. I mean, there will be some people that enjoy that card game and they'll find it quite strategic and they'll enjoy it. I personally don't, but I feel like there are so many well-developed systems in this game that together it feels very, very well done. It is a min-maxer's wet dream. And every person who's played a 4X who likes proper in-depth 4X games, like masses of management, but still a nice equal part of action as well. This just has the content that a 4X player would want. It has so many things for you to manage. Obviously, some of these things might be a little bit overwhelming for the more casual 4X players, but for people who like, RPGs with all these crazy stat management bits and bobs, it's a lot of stuff, and it's really developed quite well. So overall, despite spending a large portion of time talking about the negatives, those were quite personal to me. I didn't get on very well with the card game, so I didn't like it, and so I just sort of phased it out. But the game allowed me to phase it out. And, the game does require a lot of time, but if you phase down that difficulty option, matches can be over quite quickly. Stats can be overwhelming, but again, with the difficulty option mix-up stuff, you can phase that out and not have to care about it too much. The only problem is the tutorial, which I think needs to be made a little bit more friendly, and a little bit more personable, and a little bit more. It gets you to do things while it's explaining them to you. I feel like if the tutorial was as good as it needs to be, a lot of the negatives would just disappear, because the card game would make more sense to me. The stats would make more sense to me, and they wouldn't feel like, whoa, I've got to manage all of these things. And so I think a lot of this is simply going to be down to a little bit of streamlining in future, as the game's progression develops and they patch it, and they maybe bring out some DLC. And I hope they do bring out some DLC, because this is the kind of game where if a 4X player buys it and likes it, this is something you're going to be playing for weeks, if not months. So I can certainly see this becoming. I can see it becoming quite a staple 4X game, to be honest. And it's quite sad that it's from a random game developer, and it's just come out of nowhere, and not many people have heard of the name, because it is genuinely good. I think if anyone likes 4X titles, they're going to love this. I think this provides a lot of things that some of the more modern 4X titles haven't really been able to manage. I mean, there's no sort of wide-ranging diplomacy with all these different factions, but there is still sort of a diplomacy-ish feature with this card game and the social event on and all that kind of stuff. So overall, yeah, there are some negatives, but to be honest, the sheer content of this game, the value for money and the entertainment it's going to provide, and just they've done a really good job to keep it from becoming boring. Like, these random events prevent you from getting bored, because they're not just random events that you might see more than once, but they're random events that then have random outcomes depending on what stats you have and what kind of game you have and what kind of villagers you have. And so it does very well to make the replayability less boring, which I think a lot of 4X games fail at. So overall, fantastic game. I'd highly recommend it to 4X players. And if you are interested in getting into 4X, then knock that difficulty level down and really pay attention to the tutorial, even though it might be a little bit of a ooh. So yeah, pretty awesome game. As I mentioned at the start of the video, check out the full written review in the little section below, and of course the full performance analysis. Leave your comments in the section below, and we will see you guys on Saturday for our next week in gaming. So thanks for watching this review summary, and we hope you guys enjoyed it.